Hey y'all, it's me, John Caspian. Today we're going to be painting the Nighthaunts. So this is part 2 of our 5-part Age of Sigmar guide. We're starting off with today's episode doing these guys. They're fantastic. They're the grimghast reapers. So they got the little scythe there, nice flowing cape. This guy I did as a dry brush. So we started off with a base tone with the Nighthaunt Gloom, and then we mixed that in and blended that into the airbrush into a black. So started off with the Nighthaunt Gloom, and then added in a little bit of black ink, and that's the Vallejo black ink, and we mixed that in greater and greater amounts until we got to a firm black right there. And then we went and highlighted the top part here with a little bit of Nihilak oxide words, and then we put a leather brown where his the wood is on his scythe, and then what we did is he actually washed it down with strong tone. That's dark tone, but strong tone's over there. So we used strong tone to actually use wood and make that down into a nice brown color. And then we did a steel with the lead belcher air. I like lead belcher air simply because I get to do it without having to thin it down too much with water or some sort of metal medium, which you can use. And then what we did was we put another strong tone on there, and then the rust effect from Army Painter is a super solid orange with a nice texture to it. We added that on the side, and then also a tiny bit of the Nihilak oxide right there, and maybe a couple other spots on the other side. Just a little bit, so it looks a little bit rusted, and that's literally all the colors I used for that entire thing. The same thing here is the same brown with a little wash on it, and that's it. Cool, right? So rather than doing it just with an airbrush, which you can see here, we also have the plain version, which we're going to do with a dry brush. So all you need to do in order to do that is a regular brush that does basing. So this one's a dry brush, but I love to have this as a base brush. It's really good. Then you also need a large shade brush, and that's going to be for washes. Doesn't have to be Citadel, but it's quite good. Nice little shade brush. And then finally, you'll need a detail brush. This one's the layer brush. It's a medium layer brush. And then that's going to help you get any raised areas or smaller details that you need to get. So we'll start off with a base coat. And for this, I'm going to base coat it with Nighthaunts Gloom. So this one is a technical paint. It's a little bit more on the liquid side. So you're going to shake it up really well. And then I'm going to open that one up. You'll see that's literally just about a liquid. You can still draw from that lid there. And then I'm going to grab a handy-dandy paper towel, and we will brush it onto the brush. And because it's a liquid almost, we're going to brush quite a bit off and then hit there on the base coat. So the base coat, because we want one even coat, we're going to do this twice through. So the first time through, we're starting off on this nice gray. And again, I always like to do the primer on a different color than my base coat is going to be, unless I'm using a primer as my base coat. So Army Painter does really good primer base coats. The Retributor Armor, and I believe Lead Belcher for Citadel are really good base coat / primers, so they're really good to use. But for this, we can be a little bit messy because these guys don't have too much on them. There's really only a few things that, especially in this base coat, A-okay with covering it up. Now, in order to get on the underside here, and in order to avoid your bristles getting all damaged, you're going to carefully go in and then make a backwards motion so that the bristles don't get pushed into the model. That's very important. You can see it right there. You don't want that inside of that model to squish your bristles, just because the longer your brush can last, the better. Whether you use cheap brushes, expensive brushes, Winsor Newton, Citadel, natural hairs, synthetic, no matter what kind you're using, you want it to last as long as possible. Same principle goes here. And once we get a nice even coat, we're probably going to hit this a second time in spots that didn't quite get a full coverage, like above his blade there. Very good. As soon as that's done, we can get right to the fun stuff, which is the metal and then his arms. The arms can be any way you want in order to make them look ghostly or ethereal, because technically the Nighthaunts are ethereal. You can paint it strict white. We got white scar here, and that's great if you want to do a white look and then put a wash over it. If you do the wash, it needs to be a strong tone wash like a green, and that's the GW green wash. That will make a nice ethereal look to it. Otherwise, you can do a kind of a dry brush on top of it with something like the Nihilakh Arcside. Those words today. Nihilakh? Somebody help me with the pronunciation there, please. Nihilakh Oxide. I feel like I'm mispronouncing that every time. There we go. And now his base coat is literally done. And now this can be repeated, of course. If you want to assembly line, all you do is grab another dude, go to town. So this is the guy with the bell thing. I forget what the name of that one is. But the bell dude with all the bells and whistles. And then you would literally base coat him up the same way that you're doing this. So you see here that it's bifurcated in two. So he's got the main kind of shawl and then the rest of him here. You can totally paint this a darker color or take a dark wash with it so that it gets down closer to the dark that's on here. So if you want that darker tone, you use a darker shade versus doing just a blue wash. But the blue wash is going to neutralize a little bit of this green. So this green for me is strong. So let's go ahead and grab our shade brush as I wash off, make sure that my brush here is washed off from the base. If you haven't gotten into Age of Sigmar, you need to do it. We're going to be doing a gameplay guide on episode 4, which is 2 weeks from now. So episode 3 next week is Sigmarines, aka Stormcast Eternal. Alright, so that's done, and it's finished. It's drying off a little bit, so we can wait for a second. But I have a model over here that's already done. You're welcome. And I'm going to show you how that's going to work. So while that guy, the main guy, dries off, we're going to show it. Shake up the bottle nice and good. Now, Drakenhof Nightshade is a blue wash, and it's going to pull the green a little bit more, neutralize it a little bit. It's still pretty dark, though. That blue is pretty dark. So all we're going to do is brush in from any recesses you want and brush out, making sure that we're checking for pooling. Now, pooling is when it splotches in an area and dries off literally like a puddle, and you don't want a puddle look, unless it's what you're going for. I can say that most people aren't really going for a puddle look, so I'm going to avoid that myself. But if you want to, you are more than welcome. It's your model, paint it how you like. I'm just giving you some beginner tips. Or if you want to brush up on your skills, I had to. I have to put one pun in my live streams. I did a really bad one earlier. I was interviewing Sam Webb from Modifius, and he's like, or he says something about momentum, which is one of the game's, I don't know, elements of the game, one of the mechanics in it. And I said, oh, okay, so it's hard to maintain momentum. I thought it was a really good moment, but I'm pretty sure it fell flat on its face. As with most of my puns. I know Mark will identify with that. There we go. So when that one darkens up, all we do is go back in, check for pools, and then brush them away. And then you can go in with multiple layers on here. So you see how that is nice and shiny for now? Compare that with the green that's on there. So you see the two? Slightly neutralize that green a little bit. I go in with one more layer of that blue, and that's going to be much nicer for what I'm wanting to do with it. Now, if you want to have a bolder color, don't use as much wash, and if you do use wash, you can mix it down with water, medium, something else to kind of thin it out a little bit. And you can see here, these lower parts are drying out. This part is still wet, so while that is drying out, even though it's nice and warm in the studio space, I think that looks pretty good to go. We're going to give it a go. Good college try. Washing in the creases, crevices, brushing. If you ever want an effect that kind of blends, you can go from an extreme, and then as that wash is going away, because it's getting put on the model, then you can kind of do it a little bit higher up, not so much, and that's going to do a kind of a blend. It's not like a proper blend like you would do with like 2-brush blending. It's just a little bit of a kind of a hack. It depends on how close you want to examine it later, because it could be real good or real bad. Yeah, Colin, what's up? I see the laugh emoji. Love that emoji. I think it's one of my favorite ones. I wish there was a winning emoji. Then I could do that every time I win a game, which is about twice in a year. There we go. That looks pretty good. So I'm not going to finish up this on this model. I'll finish it up later. And the reason why is I want to get to the next part, which is the metals. So we have these metal parts right here, and they're along where the shawl meets the other draping, you know, ill-maintained dress. And so in order to get that, we're going to go with a smaller brush size. And that can be a layer brush. It can be a detail brush. The name and the brand can be different. But what you're wanting to do is make sure that that tip is nice and strong. So you get water, use your tongue if you have to. I like to use a little bit of water because I clean my brushes with brush cleaner, and I don't want to lick that. That's, no. Disgusting! I suppose if that's your thing, though, you're more than welcome to. Ah, yes, when I make a pun, dude, I have some really bad puns. Like, I thought I had a really good joke, and then I like kind of said it out loud, and it was awful. And it was something along the lines of, why do gamers make good lovers? Because we play with models in the dark, and yeah, or we stroke models. And then it got really awkward. My wife was like, you know. No. I'm like, what? I make hilarious puns. Except that one, it was not good. Not a good pun. So all we're doing here is we're going into the crevice, like right there, as you can see, and then we're going in, and we're not putting too much pressure, because again, the bristles don't want to get damaged, and then we're brushing away. If you do, it's okay. Happy accidents, as Bob Ross said. Happy accidents will happen, because you can always fix them later. Unlike unwanted children. You can always fix a brushstroke later. Come on, you gotta admit that was a good pun. That was a good one. So I need to do some after-hour streams so that I can say what I really want to do, or say what I really want to say, because most of the daytime times, you don't want to like say something that's terribly inappropriate. Although I'm pretty sure I just did, but most of the time you don't want to do that. But I'm cool with doing like a Twitch stream where I let loose. I might have to do that on a personal account or something. That'd be a David call. He'd let me know. I think I'm already borderline right now. But we're having a good time, right? Everyone's enjoying this. All right, so that's a pretty simple process. The interesting thing about metals when you're painting it is that if you paint it on from one angle, you're going to miss like a side. So I don't know how well you can see that. It might be a little blurry. But if you're looking at it from one angle, I'm going to see if I can adjust the camera there, then it's going to look like it's not painted. It's just kind of the artifact of metals. They're kind of tough sometimes. I like to airbrush them. Let's adjust that. Focus. Nope. There we go. All right. There, you can see that. Like right there, I have to brush on the side of that in order to get that metal look. Otherwise, it's going to look like it's not even painted properly. And everyone knows if it doesn't look like it's painted properly, it sucks. It's terrible. 3 paint minimum, y'all. And a wash and a highlight. Or in this case, dry brush. And there's the metal. And I can always go back in and add more, but that's the basic metal. So in order to wash that, all you got to do is go with a strong tone, dark tone, whatever you'd like. And then come back in later with a dry brush. So adding dark tone, that's the black wash. I have my wet palette over here. It's away from the camera, so you can't see it. But all I'm doing is dabbing it on there. And no, not dabbing like the dance move, please. If I see another dab in my life, I could end someone. Because seriously, that's the worst. And then there's this flossing thing that's going on. I don't understand what that's about either. Flossing? Like, these kids don't actually floss, and then they're doing a move called the floss? No. Not going to deal with that. There we go. All right. This is pretty good already. Now, this is okay if it's a little messy as well, because life is messy, and it's okay. Again, the goal is not to be perfect. It's to make progress. It's like with the government, right? We got to make progress. Not perfect. Man, I am on fire right now, huh? Yes. There we go. See? And now that has a little wash in there. You can always add more wash, but right now I think that's good enough. It's just a little amount. And just a little bit's okay, you know? That is perfect. Very nice. So, moving on from there, while that dries off, and enjoys its time in the sun. Then we will add our color to our staff stick thing. So for this one, I love Reaper paints myself. I don't think we're stocking them right now at the store, but we have all kinds of equivalents of this. So all this is kind of a light brown or a tanned color. So this one says leather brown, and it starts off pretty bright, and this is going to look really awkward at first, kind of like high school portraits, and then later on it's going to look great, like after Botox. So let's put that on. There we go. Just a little bit of work on them is going to go a long way. That's what the doctor said. I am really on fire right now. Loving it. There we go. So when you're putting it on here, you don't have to worry so much about like getting on his hand or getting it on the metal, because you're painting those raised areas later. Like especially right here where he's grabbing the staff. Where he's grabbing the staff, you can go ahead and get in there. And if it gets on his hand, that's okay. His hand will live. He can always use Dawn, get it off. Although technically I'm not sure how he holds it if he's ethereal. Someone's going to have to help me understand that. If you don't interact naturally with the plane, how you holding this thing? Because it looks pretty solid in all the photos. It doesn't look ethereal like the actual Nighthaunts do. Somebody explain this to me. So here, it looks fairly bright, and it's not great. Like, that doesn't look fantastic. It looks like something's wrong with the wood, or it could be some sort of strange plastic look. And all you do is wash that. And I'm going to show you that now. So washing it, you can do two things. You can use the large wash that we used before, or I'm going to use the detail wash, detail brush here, and use the wash. And so for that, I'm going to go back to the strong tone. Nope, these are all lies. I'm going to not use the strong tone. I'm going to use... Where is it? Where'd it go? That's okay. We're doing it live. We're going to go with the dark tone and see what happens. So this is technically a black wash, but we're going to see how it works. We can always add in a little bit of Reikland Flesh Shade later. So here, I'm going super heavy on it, and I'm actually wanting it to pool. So before I said not to let it pool, and this time I do want to let it pool, because I'm doing a reverse highlight. Typically what you do is you do the base tone and then you brush along the edges to bring out the edges. And here I'm washing on all the non-edged parts, and then the only thing that's going to be left is going to be the highlight. And this is going to take about 2 coats, even though I didn't try it before with this kind of black. I think this dark tone is the equivalent to a Nuln Oil for GW. It's pretty close. It's maybe a little greener, I think. Anyway, it pulls green. According to my eyes, but, you know, things are faulty. I do wear glasses, so you never know. Yeah, look at that. That's going to be nice. Bam. That's a good one. Imagination, yes. So, that is a nice little wash. A little dark. That's good. And we're going to do this as a metal as well. And then the metal for his scythe is going to be washed with a reddish tone. In this case, Reikland Flesh Shade. If you don't have colored washes, I highly recommend to get them, because it changes just enough as you want it to. In this case, it's going to help bring out some of the rust color. So with this, we're going to go back to the base coat, Lead Belcher, shake it up a little bit, and then we're going to simply do a broad brush stroke on his scythe blade. And the blade, of course, wants to be rusty, because if you don't have a rusty blade, then you can't ensure that the person, you know, loses limbs and whatnot, because tetanus is a danger everywhere in the universe. Tetanus is real. Unlike the actual Nighthaunt, I don't know, I guess he's real, just not interacting properly with reality. And then the part that's like meeting the wood, I'll do that a little bit later after the wood's dried, because if I brush it right now, it's going to get the wash onto this brush, and that's no bueno. And I'm not caring too much about the thickness of here. Like, you can see the brush strokes a little bit. That's okay. It looks pretty good. Because again, we're going to wash that down. It's going to be a whole lot at once. So his first blue shade has been done. We're going to go back in with his top layer here, and we're going to wash that with the dark tone, and that's going to be that same dark equivalent of these guys here. You could go in, if you wanted to, with a green, but I think I'm okay without that. So now we're using the dark tone on his main shawl call thing. And that's going to be the equivalent of using a darker paint to begin with, but this will have some of those tones coming through that we want. And then I'm doing it from the top down because I have less wash at the bottom, which means it kind of blends a little bit better. Again, it's hard to do proper blending with washes because it's not what they're designed to do. But you can help a little bit. You have the power. Look at that. Now, anytime I go into an armpit, I don't smell it afterwards, but I put a little more wash in there because it's really, people associate armpits with darkness and death, like the plague, so I do as well. And so I'm going to avoid as much as possible and avoid the area, but when I do, I just got to go in, put it down, get it done, get out. And that's done. If you ever miss a spot, I would check thoroughly on the model after you're done with your washes, and then make sure you didn't miss a spot, because I often will miss spots near details like this, and it doesn't look good. Like, it becomes real obvious when you're fully done with a model, and you missed a big old, like, crevice, and that crevice is like 3 shades lighter than everything else. But yeah, a couple of washes, that black is going to look fantastic. Yeah, that's going to look great. So, those things are washed. That thing's base coated. I'm going to show you the final step, so to speak, and that one's going to be the dry brush. So, what we're going to do is we're going to dry brush one layer, which is going to be about midway up this bottom area here, and that's going to be the nihilic oxide. The nihilic is another technical, which ends up being a thick wash. It's very much watery texture. You can see it right there. Bam. And that one's going to be a dry brush, and I have a dry brush right here. There we go. Any old brush will do. And for this, you really got to make sure you don't have... So I dig in and really brush a lot. Not a whole lot on the brush. And this part can take a little bit. You don't want... Oh, did I poke his scythe inside the pot? I think I might have. You don't want to go too crazy on this because it has to build up after a while. And you can go in and take a little bit of time if you want. Don't be too aggressive on these models because they're kind of spindly. And I don't think I got nearly enough on this guy. There we go. You can see a little bit of difference there. So you're going to mix. The first step is going to be putting that nihilic oxide. And then you're going to put a little bit of white scar and do another layer slightly lower down. And that's how you're going to work up your layer and blend. And it's not going to be a blend like this guy over here because that's a airbrush blend. And I also went down toward darker. But as you're going lighter, you're basically doing the slightly lighter area in a large portion. And then as you go up in lightness, you're doing less and less of them. And that way you get that faux blend. That's going to look fantastic. It's going to look about as real as the Nighthaunt character does. But still, you're creating an effect. I realized I didn't brush nearly enough of that off there, but it is A-okay. Because honestly, you just got to get the paint down sometimes. Look at that. Already looking good. A trick you can do it, just like I can speak English, is to have a highlight near an area like this where there's nothing there. And that way, A, you use less paint because you're brushing less of it, but then it's less of an obvious transition. So right here is a perfect little area on this dude to make it happen. And then that area there, nice little strong dry brush. And already that's pretty good, right? Well, now we're going to mix the nihilic oxide with a little bit of white scar. So in the mixing, you can get a water bottle top. Bam. Slap it down. Have a good time. And then you're going to put maybe a little bit on here. A little bit more than that because we're doing a little bit of model. There. Perfect. Look at that. And then we're going to wash the same brush off. Make sure we don't have any of that oxide left over. And this is one advantage of the dripper bottles, but you know what? YOLO. White scar. Here we go. Going to put on opposite sides, and then we get to mix it together. So opposite sides, and then I mix how much I want until it's the right look. I'll mix the whole thing. It looks good this way. Yeah. But you can control how much you mix together by putting large amounts on either side. Going to town. Good. It's kind of a half dry, and then we're going to brush that on there. And it's less of an area, again, than the previous amount. And this might need a little bit more drying off here. So you can determine how dry it is before you do it. And there we go. So you do this same process until you're happy with the amount of highlighting there is. So this is actually not bad. It shows off pretty well on camera. I would put one more layer myself of white, and I might even go pure white and do a very light amount at the very tips. And that might be great. That might be all I need to do to make it pop. It's all about experimentation and finding out what works best with you. It's like driving a car, like test driving a car. You just got to drive one, find out. There we go. And that makes it super pop, which I am very happy with. And then all I do is later on, I would come back to this model and say, is that enough if I just eyeball it? So I put the model away. I work on another model for a little bit. So I'd work on this guy, see how I like it. And then once I'm done, I would simply go back and say, okay, looking at it fresh, how is that highlight? To me, that's not quite extreme enough. All I'd need to do here is add one more layer of white at the tips, and then a whole bunch of white, and I might literally take the whole base coat of white and put it down there, just like the models, and that will be done. So, you can see already here how the staff has now looked a much darker wood color, and that comes out as a different type of wood than what I'm used to looking at. I'm usually looking at the reddish woods. So you can go back in and use the Reikland Flesh Shade and wash over this to make it more of a red. Then you're going to do the same thing, Reikland Flesh Shade over the blade, or a dark tone if you want to. That can be a blackish color, and then come in with a highlight. But overall, that's pretty much it. The only other thing I would do with his skin tone, and I'll show you that real quick, I'm going to come in with a detail brush, and I'm going to go in with a white, and I'm going to just be very careful with this, because now you're getting in parts that you don't want to repaint again and again. So I'm going in with a nice little light layer, and you can see him here. Very good. Very carefully brush on top of them. And once that's done, I could do the same leather brown that I do on his face, because he has a little face string thing, and the same leather brown on his studded leather part here. I'm not even sure what that would be called. No idea. And once that's done, you're ready for some highlighting. And you can dry brush again on these areas, or edge highlight, totally up to you. And that would be the whole process. So that is how you paint a Nighthaunt. If you're looking to start collecting, I highly recommend grabbing one. We have, I don't know, almost 10 staff members who are doing armies right now. So grab yourself one, show off some updates. Next week, we're painting Stormcast. So I have my little dude here. We're going to go with a silver and red color scheme, kind of crimson. It's going to be really dramatic looking. So it's a little bit darker. It's about the same darkness as this guy, with a little bolder of a highlight. So it's going to be pretty cool. They're going to have a nice little contrast between the two. Week 4 is playing the gameplay basics, and then week 5 is all about how to continue your collection. So thanks, y'all, for joining me today. There is your Nighthaunt, how to paint. If you have any other questions, please put them in the comments. You can come to the store, ask away, find out a good color scheme. Most everyone does Nighthaunts the same way, but you never know. And have a good night.